My pihia is Pirongia toko moanga, ko Waikato toko awa, ko Surtees with an Evinrude motor toku waka, ko Flint toku iwi, ko Hamilton ahau, and ko Auckland toko kainga in, I can't say the last word, I struggle with that one, that's a difficult one. So I'm Stephen Flint, I'm Director of Commercialisation at Auckland Uni Services. For those that don't know, we are a sponsor, but for those that don't know, Auckland Uni Services Limited is the commercial arm of the University of Auckland. So when the university deals with industry, with contract research, as well as the licensing and tech transfer, as it's called in the industry, or taking technology out of the universities, that's the part that Uni Services plays. So I've got this photo up here. I kind of like it because it's one of the best ones I've taken. That was, I took that in Galapagos about a month ago, and I kind of liken startups as, you know, trying to track whale sharks. You kind of know the area that they're in, but they're bloody hard to find. So setting that scene. So I'm going to talk about the early stage funding and working through this, and I thought one of the good ways of representing this is, especially the engineers in the room and product developers, the TRL, the technology readiness levels through that. I think it might have been NASA that brought it out many years ago, the 1 to 9, and it's really about developing the product right the way through. So I'm going to talk a bit about funding in the basic research area, so right back in the universities, the CRIs, etc. Moving through, and MB plays a big part in those areas. A bit of pre-seed, what we use to sort of as lubricant to get those ideas into potentially companies, whether it be through licensing or whether it be through startups. And then into the seed area, which you're all very familiar with. And if you think about the real areas that we struggle in terms of capital and just moving things far enough along, so around the TRL 6 and 7 is kind of the area that there's a bit of a struggle, because we at universities and CRIs is trying to take really early stage research and move it forward, and so we're investing very early and trying to get it through far enough that it might show a real indication, particularly the market. You know, a lot of angels want to see a bit of revenues, but with deep tech, you know, our IP-rich, science-based, it can take an awful long time to get there. So that's always often a bit of a struggle. It's fair to say there's a lot more investment out there, and it's been moving back, so that's good. You all know that, you sit in that space. And then, of course, moving over this side, the expansion capital, and there's been a huge amount of talk about it. I've been listening to, you know, conversations as well, talking about that area, so well aware of that, so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. MB, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, plays a huge role in that early stage funding. So this is the grant funding for universities and CRIs particularly. And the Endeavour funds, they come out every year. Two main categories, so smart ideas, which is generally shorter term funding, smaller teams, so 2 to 3 years, and smaller kind of grants, etc. So that's about 18 million per year. That was, I think it was last year's. So it'll be similar in next year's round. And then the research programs, which are the big meaty science areas, usually pretty big teams, collaborations across universities and research. Industry involvement is really critical if you want to get approved. And we're talking about 3 to 5 years, and often sort of the latter, the 4 to 5 years, and they can be up to quite a number of millions of dollars. So that's really looking at investing in sort of real science with the potential of making a real big difference. Now, the key thing drivers here. They can be social, they can be environmental, but really the key driver is economic. So the government has been signalling for a long time that these interventions are for mainly economic gain, and so for a benefit to New Zealand. And really you're going to get that by creation of more export revenue, i.e. taxes, ultimately, and also more jobs. So they're the real drivers between those funds. And then the bit where myself and the others that work in the tech transfer area, this is for us critical funding. So it's only a very small pot. It's 8.3 across all these organisations. It's largely devolved funding, so we get to make decisions, and we've all got robust processes for making those decisions. And in fact, a number of you here are actually on those investment committees for either KiwiNet or ourselves. And why it's critical is because basically tech transfer from a university. Now, a university is there to teach new science, right? And this is, and you think you've got risk, right? Come back to where we are. Like, that's real early stage risk, right? So it's essentially a cost centre. It's not unlike, where you might see it for yourselves until you get a win that puts it in, puts money back in the pot. And tech transfer around the world, generally most of them have made their money from a drug that went to market and a nice little royalty flow over that. I mean, a few years ago now, Stanford were making, I think they had 60 million royalties per annum, and 80% was from one drug and Google, and both were coming off patents. So that's the kind of play. So it's pretty high risk. We've been fortunate. We've had a few exits that have helped, but it's a numbers game as much as anything. Again, that's to get the technology out from the labs into New Zealand business, whether it be licensing to existing companies or spinning out, starting companies. I thought I'd give a bit of context about us in the scheme of things, just a bit of understanding. So a couple of years ago, we had about 3 million. So for every dollar of pre-seed, we put in a couple of dollars of our own. So leverage that right up. But the problem was, and Randy's pointed this out before, is both yesterday and today, is the problem is you get diluted out really quickly, but you just can't progress it to the point. And I mentioned that sort of the valley between us and, say, the angels, and moving through that area, and it's notoriously difficult for really science-based long-term sort of technology. So you do need some. So we're fortunate at Uni Services that we do over 100 million in contract research. So the little thin margins from that, we can invest back in, and we can take that, and that's why we've now got a $20 million fund. That means we can actually do a hell of a lot more than we could ever do before. It's open and evergreen. Basically, there's no time limits. The returns go back into the fund, and we just hope it keeps growing and growing with those exits. We do about 130 ideas or pitch to us a year. In actual fact, we're going to be 150 this year. We'll continue to grow that. But this is a key metric for us. We've been delivering a 3 times return on capital. That's pretty good for such an early stage, and I'm not sure the metrics from the other universities and CRIs, but if you think about the leverage and pre-seed and the return on that portfolio of from the government of 8.3, it's a pretty damn good return for New Zealand. So in the last 18 months, we've done spin-outs, 15 spin-outs. Now, because we have got the fund, the emphasis is more on spin-outs and licensing. It's really hard to make much money from licensing, to be honest. And so even though it's higher risk with the startups. But this all comes from building the ecosystem. So for 13 years, I think it is now, Auckland University has been running the Velocity, previously called Spark, Velocity Business Planning program. That was Jeff Witcher implemented it. And that's built a whole ecosystem around that. And now we've got the Centre of Innovation and Entrepreneurship with a vast array of programs that they've workshops all around creating businesses and taking things to market. They touch 10% of the 40,000 students with their programs. So it's actually about building the whole ecosystem. These opportunities don't just pop up overnight. The other key criteria is that we co-invest alongside others. So of those 15, we've had 50 million of investment go into those. So 18 million RAIN, that's a drug. Ketamine was 1 million we put in versus 7 from the Medical Research Commercialisation Fund, or Brandon Capital. And Soul Machines, which you might have heard in the last couple of days, we put another 2 million into that, but that was Horizon Ventures who pumped 10 million into that one. Sorry, not $10 US, 10 million around those. Some of those companies over there you'll be familiar with. The problem we were trying to solve, and Randy mentioned it earlier, he mentioned it yesterday and also today, is having syndicates that can invest through the different rounds. And that was the challenge that we had, is we could get it through to a certain place, and then some of the early stage investors, the angel groups, but where that expansion capital was coming in. So we ended up partnering with both Brandon Capital for the medical technology side, so that they can invest in technologies coming out of New Zealand and Australian research organisations in the medical fields. And the same for IP Group. IP Group for almost 20 years have been commercialising technology from the likes of Oxford, Cambridge, other UK universities, Penn State, Yale, Harvard, and they wanted to set up in Australia. And the Australians actually invited us into the camp with our track record and to strengthen their proposal to the IP Group. And so they're 200 million. They're going to invest in the next 10 years out of the top 8 universities and ourselves. I think Brandon Capital was 220 million Australian for this. 430, even better. So they bring a capacity to follow on. But what I want to point out is that doesn't mean that, so the good thing about those partners is it doesn't mean we have to take those companies offshore. Right, so I think it was mentioned yesterday about taking American money and having to relocate offshore. With these partners, we don't. If New Zealand's the right place for them, we can keep them here. But it doesn't stop partnering with other investors, and you see some of those on the side there that we've invested lately with, or in the last few years around that. So there's plenty of room for others, and co-investment is the key. It's all about managing risk, but it's also about enough capital into these companies. And because we sit in a space where science and patents and etc. and longer time frames, then that capital is absolutely critical. Then it comes back to what that cap table looks like as well. And so we've changed our model. The typical model in tech transfer is sort of one third to the inventors, 1/3 to department, 1/3 retained by the tech transfer office. We realised that just wasn't working for founders. It was disincentivizing, and when they went to, say, the US straight away, the potential investors were saying, you got to change that cap table. So what we do now that we've changed to a fund mindset, is we're the investor, so we can tip in the IP for a small shareholding, 10-15% maximum, depending on the size of the IP portfolio, etc. They keep the majority, and that means that as they go through, they stay incentivised. So the founders seem a lot happier, follow-on investors are a lot happier. So it seems to be working, but it's early days with that. But those cap tables are increasingly important in terms of those follow-on rounds. So that's me.